Antony, good morning. Were you surprised at this figure, 2,000 people admitting they'd voted multiple times at last election?
No, it's perfectly normal. I mean, that happens at all elections around the country. The figure corresponds to about 13 per electorate, so it's not actually very many people. The narrowest electorate at the last election was 53 votes, which was Fairfax, which was Clive Palmer's seat. So most of those instances, that's how the numbers are. Now, if this was a business, you wouldn't worry about it because the incidence is so low. But of course, it's an election, so you want the incidence to be close to zero and as close to zero as possible.
And at this stage, it's not clear what proportion of those 2,000 were intentionally voting multiple times and whether there were clerical errors?
Well, the Commission said that 80% of them were accident.
Yeah.
The vast majority of multiple votes are either clerical errors or confused elderly. That people vote in their nursing home and are taken out to vote by their parents again on the weekend. The cases which have got to court on this, where the court has gone through all the documentation, the last one, Chatsworth in Queensland, there were 30 instances of multiple voting in a state election in Queensland in an electorate, exactly the same rate as federally, I should say. And the court went through all 30 instances and 28 of them were absolute clerical errors and the other 2 were confused elderly. And there's no point in prosecuting someone who's not in a state. They should be taken off the roll rather than dealt with in that way.
So the commentary this morning is saying that the system does feel a bit dated, where you go in and sometimes you don't even have to identify, show identification, and people just cross you off a list. Is the system in Australia dated? Are there voting systems in other countries that are far more advanced than ours?
Well, the system we've got is applied through all Australian history. We've never had in Britain, you must vote at a fixed polling place with the idea that basically the people in that polling place will know who you are, but that's not the case. You don't have to present ID. So even if you have fixed polling places, you still don't have to offer ID in Britain. Most European countries, you must show ID, but those countries have identification cards. You must have a card. They don't have an electoral roll, they have an ID card. The rules have tightened up in places like Canada and America in recent years, but New Zealand, like us, continues to work in this method. There has been some experimentation. People who are multiple voting are going around from one polling place to another. That's the instance of it. What they can do, and this has been tried in some states, is to wirelessly connect the polling places so when they mark the rolls off, if you've already voted in another place, then you won't be allowed to vote again. Now, you have to give them a declaration vote in the end anyway, because the reason that you might have been marked off the roll was an error in the other polling place. So you can go down that path. That's a bit difficult, again, for doing across a whole country. The other idea is ID laws, where you must prevent some form of identification. Now, that's being trialled in Queensland. It's being used at Queensland at the next state election for the first time. It's been the first time it will be used in Australian history. Oh. And what you'll have to do is come up with some form of ID. Now, it's not picture ID. You've got to prove where you live. So you can do things like power bills and those sorts of things to prove it. And if you don't have some form of ID, you'll have to fill in a declaration vote. But the question is, how far down this path do you go? There still isn't proof of multiple voting, because you still can't pin that somebody multiple voted. The only way you could really prove someone multiple voted is to start breaking the secrecy of the ballot and pulling ballot papers out, which is what they do in some countries.
So based on what you said to a previous answer, it doesn't sound like you're too concerned about what's happening at the moment and that there is any real need to try and go down the path of making it more secure.
You always have to make it more secure. You have to be worried about any incidents of multiple voting. Now, the conspiracy theorists get on about this is, someone is stacking an election. That is extremely unlikely because the average close electorate, we saw one with 53 votes at this election. At the previous election, the narrowest was 450. So if you want to stack an election, you need to know what electorate, and you need to arrange the people. And the more people involved in doing this, the more likely it is to become known. The parties aren't stacking, but the system is open to anarchists who are just trying to bring down the system, people who are just trying to prove that somehow the whole system is corrupt, and I'm going to go and multiple vote. Now, in a system like that, say in Western Australia, where that final position, if there'd been no ballot papers lost, might have come down to one vote. In that situation, 20 multiple votes in Western Australia might have been enough to invalidate the result because the result was so close. So what you've got to be concerned about is that sort of thing could occur. But any tightening up of rules of this sort, you might knock out this tiny number of multiple votes, but you're actually going to knock out more people from voting who should be allowed to vote. you'll find people who turn up to vote without proper ID and just walk away. People who have difficulty presenting ID, people who live in Indigenous communities that aren't connected to networks and don't have driver's licence, women who live with husbands and they don't have any of the bills in their name or a driver's licence.
So as far as you're concerned, it's best to leave the system the way it is?
No, you continue to try and make the system tighter. Down the track, there is more and more electronic marking of roles coming in. With the growth of technology, there's more and more chance that those role markings off could be done. But at this stage, this is about role marking, this is electronic voting. This is a major issue which is going to come up with electronic voting as well. These sorts of things. It is always an issue that's got to be pursued and it's got to be watched. But it is not the sort of 2,000 voters in an electorate of 13 million is not very much. It's not good enough for an electoral authority, but it's good enough for if you're running a business this way.
Okay, also on electoral matters, the rerun of the WA Senate election is going to cost around $20 million. Is that about what you expected, or is that cost increasing because of increased security now because of what happened in the last election?
Well, the cost will increase. I mean, that is something to say. With increased security, instead of returning officers taking the ballot box, instead of polling clerks taking the ballot boxes back to returning officers, if you want increased security, you're going to have to use courier companies to do that. And if you want to employ courier companies across the country at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, it's going to cost you money. So there's those sorts of things which are going to come in. The more security you've got over the ballot papers, the higher the cost. So the cost will go up. But people should understand it's not cheap to run an election. You're employing, I think in Western Australia, they employed 75,000 people to run the election on election day. It's a lot of people.
So 20 million is to be expected?
Yes.
Okay, Antony Green, thanks a lot.
Thank you.